Hello and welcome to this Google Forms Bootcamp. Today we're going to be covering what Google Forms is, how to use Google Forms, how to assign Google Forms in Google Classroom, and how to grade Google Forms. So, what is Google Forms? Google Forms is a web-based app within the G Suite that is used to create forms to make surveys, quizzes, registration events, evaluations, applications, games. There's so many different things that you can use Google Forms for. The data that is collected from forms are stored in a spreadsheet. And that's one of the really cool things about Google Forms is once you create a Google Forms, a spreadsheet is automatically created and you're able to store information there or retrieve data there or manage your data in however way you would like to. And the best of all is Google Forms is free for everyone with a Google account, regardless of whether or not you're an educator or you have a personal Gmail. So how to create a Google Form? You will go to the Google Drive, click on New, then More, then Google Forms, and then you can choose to create a blank form or a form from a template. Now the difference between those two is if you choose from a template, it means that you have something to work like pre-made or pre-populated content that you can edit to suit your style. If you create a blank form, that means that you'll start from scratch and you have a little bit more freedom to be as creative as you want or to make the form the way that you want it to be created. Or you can click, you can search in the Omnibox, type forms.new. Now, let me just mention that if you choose this method, it does not create forms from a template. You'll be creating a brand new Google Forms. So just be mindful, if you want to use a template, you will go through creating a Google Form from Google Drive. If you just want to start with a blank form and get creating, you can go to you can type forms.new. So our first task will be to create a blank Google Form, and we're going to change the name from Untitled Form to Bootcamp Practice Form. So since I'm creating a blank form, I'm going to use the option forms.new. And it's going to create a brand new blank Google Form for me. And based on our task, it says to change the title. So I can click in up here to change the title, or I can change it from here. Either one, it doesn't matter. So we'll choose this one and I'll call it Bootcamp. Once you do that, you'll notice that if I click here, I don't need to type this title again there. So we've completed our first task. Next, it's how to use Google Forms. So there are many different types of questions that you could use when you're creating Google Forms. So I'm going to show you all the different types of questions that are available in a standard Google Forms. So here you notice I have short answer. So a short answer question can, as the name suggests, it's for responses that are super brief. For example, if you only want your participants or your respondents to type their name, you will choose a short answer question. Then you have paragraph. A paragraph type question is required for if you want your respondents to give you a more detailed response. Multiple choice. With multiple choice questions, you're only able to choose one correct response. And for these types of questions, you are able to, or you have the ability to shuffle the question order. So what that means, the option order. So let's say you want to minimize the opportunity. If you're using this in the class setting, you want to minimize the opportunities for students to be copying from each other or cheating. Choosing the option to shuffle options would mean that each participant or each respondent the order of the choices will differ per respondent. Then we're moving on to checkboxes. Checkboxes are similar to multiple choice. However, with checkboxes, the opportunity exists for you to have your respondents to choose more than one correct responses. Moving on, you have drop-down type questions, and this also only allows for one correct response, and you can also shuffle the response options. Then you have the linear scale. Linear scales, this is if you want respondents to rate something, you're able to use this type of question. And of course, this wouldn't have an option to shuffle. Then you have the multiple choice grid. Now this can be used for matching activities, vocabularies, or other different types of activities that you want. But for these types of questions, you're able to shuffle the row order, and you're also able to set limits where respondents can only choose one correct response per column. That's if you want that to be so. And then we're moving on to checkbox grids. Now, this is another way that you can choose matching activities, and you can also shuffle the order options, and you can also set a limit to how many responses per column. So if you want to only have 2 responses per column or 3 or what have you, you can do so. And then moving now, you have date and date. You can also choose whether or not you want to include the year. And then the final one is a time option. Now you may use these two if you're using it for like a sign up activity or things like that. So let's continue. So here where it says number 1, this icon is for you to be able to view all of your installed add-ons. Now add-ons are, I'm not going to go in depth with add-ons. I'll be creating another tutorial for you on that. But basically, Google Forms and all of the other apps within the G Suite come with its basic functionalities. However, there may be things that you want to do within an app that it wasn't originally designed to do. So that's where add-ons come on. So they're third-party companies or developers that create scripts that can run within the particular app that you're using so that they can improve the productivity of that app. Next, you have your themes. So here you're able to customize your theme if you want to choose the different color of what your form will look like, if you want to choose what particular font type, if you want to choose like have a picture in the header. Those are the things you can do under customized theme. Next, you have the eyeball, and that's for you to preview your form. So think of it as once you're creating your form, that doesn't mean it's exactly what your respondents will see. So think of it like maybe on a movie set. So you don't see the behind the scenes. You don't see the persons pulling the curtains, the director flapping the, I don't know what you call that, but you see the movie. You don't see the cameras moving in the different directions. So the preview is basically how you're able to see what your respondents will see as you build your form. Next, you have the gear cog, and that's the setting. So for your form, that's where you're able to make it into a quiz. Right now, the form that we just created is just a blank form. We didn't make it into a quiz. Quiz forms have different functions. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. You're also able to collect email addresses from the respondents by creating that in the setting that in the setting options. You're also able to limit responses. Now, what this means is if you want to have your form is set up in such a way where each respondent can only submit one form, then that's where you would select that in the gear settings. Next, you have the send button, and that's where you're able to share your form via your email. You can use a link and send it to via any other source, social media, and so forth. And then finally, you have the ellipses, and that's what this is showing. So when you click on the ellipses here, you're able to do these functions, so such as making a copy, moving it to the trash. It's like, oops, I don't want this form anymore. I can delete it. You can add collaborators and create other preferences and so forth. So task 2. So we created a Google form already, and we called it Bootcamp Practice Form. Now we're going to create a question type, a question for each of the question types that are available in Google Forms. So let me show you how to do that. So here's my practice form that I created. And as you can see, once you create your form, by default, it creates one question for you. And so on this left-hand side, you're able to add a new question, import questions. Now, what this means is if you have previous forms that you've used in the past and you want to like recycle questions, that's where you would import questions from those forms. Here you can add a title and a description. So for example, this is just a basic question that I would have, but if I want to give a little bit more, a description or some more information on that question, I can choose to add a description. Then you have images. That's one of the very versatile things about Google Forms is your questions do not only have to be made up of text, but you can also incorporate images. That's why, so if you'll notice, once I hover on the place for me to create my question, I have an option here to use an image instead of text. Then I have, I can add a video, and it's the same thing. And here I can add sections. Now we're going to talk about sections in a little bit. So let's just complete the task for this particular exercise. So we're creating a question for each type of question that Google Forms allow us to. So my first one, if I click on the drop down, I'm going to see all of the question types. So I'll start with the first one, which is short answer, and I'll just type name. Now here, let me just explain what these mean. I can duplicate if I want 2, 3, 4 more of these particular types of this question. I can duplicate it and edit as I go. If I was like, oops, that's not what I wanted to do, I don't want this question anymore, you can delete it. You can make it a required question. If you set it as required, it means that your respondents will have to answer that question, and they will not be able to move on unless they've answered the question. Then you have some additional settings. When you click on the ellipses, you're able to have a description. Let me just move this out of the way. So you can choose a description here, or you can have response validation. Now I'm not going to talk about this. This would be in another tutorial. But just briefly, response validation would mean like if you have to have a certain like exact words or an exact number, or your text cannot exceed a particular amount, that's where response validation will come in. So moving on, we'll create another question. So if I click on the plus button, I am going to click here and I'll select paragraph this time, and I'll just my next question type will be multiple choice. And let me just mention that by default, it says option 1. And there are some suggested text. Like let's say you want your responses to be ABC or 1, 2, 3. Once you start typing, you'll see the suggestions that you can continue, or you can click add-on if that's what you want your responses, your options to be. You can click add all, and it's going to create that for you. Moving on, this is what a checkbox question will look like. So again, I have option 1. If I click down here, I can just keep clicking like that, or you can type words or whatever you want your options to be. Then you have drop down. Again, you select your options. Now let me just show you quickly what this will look like. As I was explaining earlier, this is not necessarily how your respondents will see it. The drop down, for example. So if I click on the eyeball, you'll notice this is what they'll see. So here it'll be choose, and they will just select their responses. Moving on, you will then select a linear scale. For these types, you can choose where you want the least your scale to begin from by clicking on the arrow, which is 1 or 0. And here you have from up to 10. And it's optional that you create your label. So what does a 1 mean? If it's least, and 5 would be most. Again, let me show you what it will look like. Next, we'll create multiple choice grid. Now you can have as many rows and as many columns as you'd like. And your rows don't necessarily have to match the columns. It all depends on the type of question that you are creating. So if I just keep adding rows and add columns. Now let me just give a heads up for these types of questions. If you're using this, for example, for like a vocabulary exercise where you have a lot of text, it's suggested that you would have your rows have the most text and your columns just be like responses that they would want. So for example, if you wanted your students to, you're using it in school and you wanted your students to match definitions with words, the definitions would be in the row and the columns will just have the vocabulary word. And moving on, we're going to create a checkbox, and this is similar to the multiple choice grid. And again, I'll just show you a preview of what it will look like. And again, let me mention that you can decide if you want these to be only one correct response per row, or more than one, or one correct response per column. It all depends on how you're setting up your question. You have that flexibility. And then you can also turn on to require response in each row if you want. So you will turn that on. The next question type would be the date. And you can choose, again, if you want to include a year. Okay, so you will click here and you would say, if you want to include a year, you will click it or not. And if you want to include a time, you can also have a date and time, or you can create a time question by itself. And so that's it for all of the types of questions that you can create in a Google form. So let's continue with our presentation. Now that we've covered what the types of, or all the different types of questions that we can create in a Google Forms, we're now going to create another Google form, but this time I'm going to be showing you how to create sections. So we're going to name it example of section form, and we're going to create a form with 2 sections, and the section 1 will only have like multiple choice questions, and the section 2 will have, let's say, open-ended or application type questions. And we're going to name it. You can give a description of what your form is about. And let's go over to settings. Now this is where, so this is particularly for if you're creating this as an exam or a test. So this demonstration is for creating this section form when it's a quiz or a quest or an assessment. Of course, it doesn't have to be, but this is what we're using this particular demonstration for. So general would have to collect email addresses, and you want to do that because as with technology, we all know sometimes things don't always go the way that we want it to. And so even though I'm going to be showing that it's best practice to have your respondents enter their, especially if you're using this for school purposes, you would want your students to enter their first and last name or maybe their grade levels, but you also would want to collect email addresses. Another reason why collecting email addresses may be important, it depends on what's, how your school is set up. Sometimes students' names are not in their email addresses. Sometimes email addresses are made up of ID numbers, and it will be extremely difficult for you to know which student, which form belongs to which student based on ID numbers. Like you would have to do a lot of tracking, maybe going into Google Sheets and all of that, and you may not have the time to do that. So we're gonna select collect email addresses, response receipts. Now this is if you want your respondents to receive a copy of their responses, you will check that. Here we want to limit it to 1 response. So this is what I was mentioning. If you click on this, it means that your respondents will have to sign into Google, and they'll only be allowed to answer once. Now, if you're using Google Classroom, for example, and you're using a form as an assessment, and you're using your personal Gmail, Google Classroom with your personal Gmail, now this may not be an appropriate thing for you to do, because if your students do not have Gmail addresses, then they will not be able to complete your form or to answer the questions. If you're using Google Classroom, persons with Hotmail or Yahoo email addresses can join your class. Then you can decide whether or not you want your students to be able to edit after they've submitted. That's totally up to you. And to see a summary chart of their text responses. Now this means like once you finish answering the question, you can get an overview of how you responded. Then on the presentation tab, you can decide if you want students to see the progress bar. Let's say you're using the section format, for example, that we're going to be creating right now. If you want persons to see how they're progressing, you can check that. If it's 1 of 9 or what have you, so they'll have an idea of how they're progressing, you will check that. And when they're finished taking the exam or the quiz, what is that confirmation message? You can create one here that, whatever it is that you would like that to be, or you can leave it blank. Then, this is the important part. Here you will click on quizzes, and you will click on make this a quiz. Now, again, you'll notice that there's some other options that becomes active once I turn that on. When do you want grades to be released? Is it immediately after they've submitted their responses? And I'm going to show you from a student's perspective how this works. Or if you want it to be released manually after. Now let me just stop to make a short interjection here. When you're creating a quiz, you have to select, especially for like multiple choices and those ones that you have the option, except for short answers and paragraph type questions where, you know, the responses may be different unless you're creating something that the students have to write verbatim. When the students complete their quizzes, it may show that the short answers and the paragraph type questions are incorrect. Now it's going to show that because it requires teacher, like until you as the teacher go in and read those responses and assign a grade, then it's going to update to the correct, to whatever that correct grade is. So again, when you're using quizzes, only multiple choice questions where you've selected or given an answer key will show up as correct when the students are finished with their quizzes. All open-ended, such as the paragraph and short answer questions, will be marked as incorrect. Then you can also decide whether or not you want your students to see the correct answers, which questions they missed, and the point values, like how many points for each item. And then you'll click Save. So now that we have decided how we want our form, our quiz to be set up, you'll notice now that I have a responses option. Here is, so this would be the list of questions, and when you click on responses, you're going to see who responded and what their responses were, like how they responded. So I'm going to show you that in a minute. So we're just going to give this a question. Remember I said we want it to be short answer. And we want it to be required because I want it to be name. And because it's just the students' names, you're not going to assign a point to that. So moving on, you can decide again, it depends on what you're using this for. If it's for higher education, then you can leave it as if you probably want it to be, like you wanted your students to add like which department they're from or so on. Like you can also create another question and ask them to input that information. But we're not going to do that for this one. Now I am going to create my section. So because I'm now going to start my actual quiz. So I will select add section, and you'll notice it says section. This is section 1 of 2 because I have 2 sections. And section 1, so if you have to continue to section 1, so if I click here, I'm not going to go into this because this is if like you have your students, based on their response, you will send them to a different part of the form, but that's not what we're doing for this purpose. Now, again, because you made it to know whether or not your question is a required question, you'll notice this red star next to it. So what this means is your students will have to finish section 1 before they're able to go on to section 2. So you can name the section. So this section will be called like paper 1 or multiple choice questions or short answers, whatever you want that. Think of it like, you know, like in the Caribbean, for example, you have your exams and you have a paper 1 and then a paper 2. And paper 1 is usually like the multiple choice, the simpler version. And then you have your paper 2, which would be like your application or the more open-ended and in-depth responses. So it's the same idea here. So the section 2 will be called paper 1, for example, or multiple choice. Then I'm going to add my question. And you go ahead. So of course you can choose Remember, because this is multiple choice, you're only going to choose probably multiple choice, check boxes, drop down, and multiple choice grid or checkbox grid. So these are the ones these are the types of questions that you can have in this section. All right, so I'm just going to create another blank one. And again, you're going to make it a required question, so your students have to answer. Now, let me show you how to create answer keys. So these are my options. So in this question, I want my students, like I remember I set it up where they will release the scores, right? So I click on answer key, and I'm going to say how many points should be allotted to this question. So this question is just going to be worth 1 point. And then I'm going to click on the add answer feedback. So I'm going to click, let's say this is going to be the correct response. And I can choose if to add an answer feedback. Now, this is a message that if your students answered incorrectly, is there a message that you want, like a text you want to add there? Or you want to point their attention to a video, for example, so that they can have a refresher, or a link to something for them to read or watch so that they can have a refresher. And similarly, if it's the correct response, then you can say like, like, yes, you can probably say like, good job, or you can give a little bit more emphasis on why that is a correct response. So I'm not going to do that, or let me just do that for this one. So, and here I'll say something like, then I'll click save. And again, you can edit as you go or delete if you want, and you just click on done. Moving on, let me just show you one other thing before we move to another section. Is when you see this arrow, like once you have more than one question, like let's say like, oh, I don't want this to be the first one, I want to move the order of the question, you will click, if you move, you'll see it move your cursor, it changes to like a cross. You can hold down your trackpad or your mouse and you can drag the questions to the order that you want, in the orders that you want them to appear. Next question. Again, this time we're just going to choose a drop down, and we have I have my options. And again, I'm going to give an answer key. This is going to be worth 2 points or 1 point. It depends. It's totally up to you. You can choose whether or not you want to give an answer feedback. If you don't, then you click on done. Notice up here also, it tells you how many total points your quiz is out of so far. Now I'm going to add another section. So because this is a tutorial, I'm going to keep it short, but again, you can have your quiz as long or as short as you want. It's all up to you and the purposes that you're creating it for. Now we're going to create another section, and if I click add section, and this section will be called like paper 2 or, and again, I'm going to, oh, did I make these required? Because I don't want students to, oh, I didn't, let me change the answer, choose the answer key. In this case, I'll do option 4. Done. Oh, let me change it. So I want to shuffle the option order. So that means that, as I mentioned earlier in the video, each respondent, the order will be different for each respondent. So I'm done with that. Now for this question, because this is application, I'm going to choose maybe a short answer. And again, I'll click on answer key. And I'm going to click on mark all answers incorrect because you're going to click this option if you want to, because you have to review the responses, unless you're creating a question in such a way where the students will have to give a direct response. So for example, let's say it's a number, like you had, it's math, and they had, like you said, the question was something like, what's the product of, 9 times 4? Of course, there's just one correct response for that. Then you would select data validation. That's what I was talking about earlier, and you would create that. So let me just show you that real quickly. So the correct answer here has to be, let's say 5, okay? And the point system will be 1, and I click done. So if this student does not give this response, then they're going to get that question incorrect. I'll make this a required question again. A paragraph, and then now we want them to explain something, for example. You can choose how much. These will probably be worth more points than a multiple choice. And again, because this is open-ended, it will be impossible for you to give a specific, to determine exactly what. See that if I click next, it's not going to allow me to go on because these are required questions. And I'll just type there, and now I'm able to move on. And if I click on that response, and then here I choose, then I click next, all right. I wanted you to remember we set that validation so that the answer has to be greater than 5. I think I made a mistake there. I shouldn't have said, yes, for this one, we said the correct answer already, so we don't need a response validation. Next. And I click submit. And now I can view my score. And here you'll see that I got this one incorrect. And here it shows me what the correct response is and the feedback that I would have given. In this case, again, it's incorrect, and it told me what the correct answer was. And for this one, this is where you see I will have to go in as a teacher and I will grade this. So so I have 0 out. So now that you've created your quiz, it's stored in your drive, of course, and your students, and I just showed you how it will look if a student how it will look when the students answer that. So let me just now demonstrate how you would use this in your classroom. Okay, so you go to Google Classroom. So here I'm in Google Classroom, then I'll click on classwork, then I'll click on create. Now I am not, I'll create assignment. Let me explain. If you choose quiz assignment, it's going to create a blank Google form right there for you to fill out. But in most cases, that's not what you will want, because you would obviously have created your quiz or your exam in advance, and now you are assigning it to your class. So I'll click on assignment in this case. Then I'm going to just give it a title. I'll click on add, and this time I'll add from my Google Drive. And I'm in recent. And I'm going to find that form. So this is my example form. I'll give, if I need to type some instructions, I will do so. Then I can choose how much I want it to be out of, if you want it to be ungraded, or if it's out of 100, or based on, depending on how you set up your form. So if it has to match up what your forms will be. So if it's out of 9 or out of 10 or 100 or however, you will have your question, your form match that. Of course, you can choose a due date and a topic. And you can choose if you want to assign it to all students or just some students. So I'll just click assign. And I'm now going to show you what that looks like from the student's point of view. So here in my training classroom, you'll see that I have this assignment called Bootcamp. When I click on it, I can select the quiz, or I can click on View Assignment. And then I'm going to click on here I'm going to be able to read whatever instructions that were left. And I click on the form. And I'm going to enter my email. Next. Now, from the student's view, you'll notice that I have an option to open in the assignment. When the students can either view their score, it'll open it in a new tab, and they can see how they scored for that. And of course, as I said, these are, you have to grade these as a teacher, so I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So I go back to it, then I click on Open Assignment. And you notice now that it says that it's been turned in. It says no work attached because this form is live. So I don't need to attach the form. Okay, and I am done as a student. So let me show you what it will look like from the teacher's end. So as a teacher, here is my assignment. I click on View Assignment. I'll see that one student has turned in. So I click on Turn In. And this is where the difference comes in with whether or not you're using a personal Gmail or a school Gmail. If you were using school Gmail, you'll see an option to import scores, import grades. But as I said, there are limitations to the free version. So you will have to have, your form open, or you can always go to your Google Drive, recent, and find the form. So here I see that I have 2 responses, and how I can have an overview of how my students performed on each question, you know, what the score was and so forth. I can also click on the question tab, and I can see each individual question and who answered which one correctly or incorrectly. But I'll click on the individual tab, and here I'll see the students. Now here I'll click on this student because this is the student from my Google Classroom. And I'll see that, oh, yes, this one was incorrect. You got this one correct, but here I will read the feedback, and then I will give a score. And then I'll click save, and you'll notice that the score was updated, and then it says the release score. When I click on release score, it means that the student is going to get an update of their final score. So remember, when the student finished taking the quiz, it's going to show them that their short answer and paragraph questions are incorrect, and so their scores will not be accurate. Once you come in and you grade the open-ended questions, you click on release scores, and then you would send it to that. As soon as I click send email and release. Now you will go back to your classroom, and based on how much that student scored, so I see that for this student, let me go back to the summary. I can see that this student scored 5 out of 9. So that's what I was saying earlier. Remember, when you're creating the exam, you have to decide. Right here, I can change. You will have to go back and edit the assignment to make it out of 9. So let me just put in a number here. I'll just put 45%. I mean, I'm just putting in a random number. Then I will click on return. Once I finish putting in that student score, I'll click on return, or I can leave a private message for that student. And once I'm done, I'll return their score. And that's when the students will be able to see their updated score in Google Classroom, along with any private comments that you left them for that particular question. And you'll also be able to incorporate Google Forms in your classroom. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send an email at wanda@misstechiescorner.com. You can find me on YouTube, Miss Techie's Corner. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.